Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ethics Verse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon. If you're in ethics, compliance, human resources, legal, if you're somebody who cares about improving your workplaces, this is the place to be. The only webinar series that you can't sleep through, okay? We got a great one for you today. We're talking about how to climb the ladder. We have a panel of amazing guests. Before that, we're going to do some quick announcements. So the first one is we've upgraded our game. We got a link tree to keep this super easy for you. So you can hit the QR code on the screen, or you can hit the link tree in, we're going to be dropping some links into the chat. So if you are, as you're waiting, click the link tree and you can sign up for a couple of things. You can sign up for the Ethics Verse directly, so you can see everything that's coming up. And these can just show up on your calendar every week and you can join us. You can follow Ethico's LinkedIn page. This is the best LinkedIn page on LinkedIn, according to my mom. We have all the best clips from our webinars each week, from our podcast series. So stay tuned there. Populate your feed on LinkedIn with some tips that are going to help you, broaden your impact. As I'm talking, as soon as I'm done talking through this, I want everybody to drop their LinkedIn URL. I challenge you to connect with one person. Remember, we have a very collegial industry, and everybody in all of these organizations, everybody's fighting the same fight. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You need to expand your network, because your network is your net worth. Follow me on LinkedIn as well, the best individual page on LinkedIn. And she says that's even better than my brother, my mom again. She is the arbiter of LinkedIn pages. Also, you can schedule a demo if you want to see some next gen tools. We're getting some great feedback on that. Also, if you have not seen our benchmark report yet, I don't know what tree you've been sleeping under, but this is going to be a great benchmark report, chock full of tips. So go ahead and download that. And finally, our YouTube channel is really popping off. A round of applause for Chase. He's really upping our game across the entire internet. So today, as always, we're giving away a book. The world famous Ethico book giveaway is in full effect today. We're still giving out Mary's book. This has been ripping through the ethics and compliance community. It's chock full of tips. So participate in the chat. EthicsVerse members are open for that. So you, of course, can subscribe today and be part of that. But we're giving away books like crazy around here. We're giving away 5 today. So these are going to be for folks that have the best questions, that have the best tips for elevating your career, climbing that ladder, and broadening your impact. So as always, we want a ton of participation and a ton of emojis. That's what keeps me going. Coffee and emojis is what keeps me going. Okay. Compliance Week is coming up, 72 days away. We're almost ready to launch this page. You guys are going to love this thing. We have activities for every single day. And you can borrow from these. You can borrow from a bunch of different sources, but Compliance Week is really a great opportunity for you to raise awareness about your program, get some more participation with the workforce. That is your key to crowdsourcing risk intelligence at scale, right? These folks participating in the risk management and the ethics and compliance apparatus, and Compliance Week is a great way to do it. So start thinking about it now. You got a couple of months before this thing launches. We're going to be launching this soon, but you can see we got stuff for Monday. We have a bingo game for Tuesday. We have a misconduct mystery game, a bunch of cool things coming up. This misconduct mystery game is a lot of fun. We're going to be putting out a video along with the launch of this. We played it internally, and it's a lot of fun, and it gets a lot of folks engaged. So stay tuned for that. Also, we've been giving out these custom benchmark reports to folks who attend the Ethics Verse. We usually give these to clients, but we also are, you're part of the family now. So if you're interested in seeing a custom benchmark report where we put your data in against the benchmarks that are out there across the major data points that folks use to gauge the quality of their investigation program, what are we going to do? Let's do a 1 in the chat today for a custom benchmark report. We'll have somebody reach out to you in the next couple of days and get that scheduled. And it's a great tool because it has, it's a nice PDF. It's a nice presentation that you can use internally with your team. And it'll have some customized ideas on how you can improve some of your metrics, whether that's reporting rate, substantiation rate, anonymous rate, or whatever. Ecosystem, quick little blurb about this. You guys are not going to believe this. We had a demo this week where somebody actually started crying. Can you imagine? They started crying because they were saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe your tool does that. So we have a full investigation platform in there, super flexible, ton of data analytics where you don't even have to plug into Power BI anymore. Those analytics are right at your fingertip. So if you're interested in that, there should be a button somewhere, or you of course can go to the Ethico page and grab a demo. Finally, okay, round of applause for Joe Murphy. Joe Murphy is here today. He has launched this newsletter called Compliance and Ethics Ideas and Answers. And every single week, what is it? It's about every week, right, Joe?
It's weekly, yes.
It's weekly. So you can hit that QR code there, or you can just search for Ideas and Answers on LinkedIn. And I really encourage you guys to subscribe to this, right? Your job is to sharpen the saw, to get smarter. And there's a ton of great articles, ton of great tips. I think you guys are on issue 27 or 28 right now. So there's a ton of great information in there. And again, you got to feed yourself with great tips. Ethics First is a great example of that. The books we give away is a great example of that. Ideas and Answers is another great example of that. So hit that QR code. There also should be a link in the chat. So subscribe to that newsletter. And our good friend Adam Balfour's book just went on pre-sale. So, I mean, I've been talking about this for a while. The ethics and compliance industry is really pivoting, and we're kind of stepping into this new era in this new chapter. And there's a ton of great thought leadership coming out, and there's a ton of great information coming out. Mary's book just came out. Christy Grant Hart has one coming out. Allison Taylor has one coming out next year. And Adam's book, I got an early copy of this, and this is phenomenal. So if you don't follow Adam, I would encourage you to do it. Every Sunday, he puts out a post, a super insightful post. And if you just can't get enough of Adam Balfour, go ahead and click this link, and we'll be giving this away and adding this to the Ethics Verse library as well. You of course, can search for Ethics and Compliance for Humans on Amazon and pre-order your Kindle copy, or you can wait a couple of weeks. I think it's mid or early September where the physical copies are coming out. So much love to Adam Balfour and the CCI Press for, again, pushing that thought leadership out. Next week, Ethics and Compliance Hot Topic. So my favorite store growing up, when I had the eyeliner and the purple hair, was Hot Topic, of course. And I'm kidding. But we're going to do Ethics and Compliance Hot Topics next week. The following week, we have Amy Bernard-Bahn, and we are going to be talking about behind the scenes of risk assessments, the beautiful, brutal truth. So she is with Kaplan Walker. So Miss Walker is going to be on, and Amy Bernard-Bahn, and we're going to dive deep on risk assessments. Risk assessments are a phenomenal tool, not only to see what the risk is going on in your organization, but to really start persuading and opening the minds and turning the light bulbs on at the top on where your program needs to go. So this is one that you are not going to want to miss, of course. And finally, here are our speakers. We have Nancy Higgins, Joe Murphy, Gretchen Winter, and Patrick Nazo. So Nancy is the former VP and Chief Compliance Officer of Bechtel. She had a ton of responsibilities in developing Bechtel's ethics and compliance program, a wealth of knowledge Nancy's going to bring today. So no pressure, Nancy, but we're expecting a lot from you today. Joe Murphy, of course, the godfather of compliance. I really wanted to have some Godfather music playing, but I couldn't figure that out. Joe Murphy has for over 40 years championed ethics and compliance. A lot of my new ideas, I think I've actually probably stole from him. So thanks for all those ideas, Joe. But he's spoken in more than 200 presentations across the whole world, 21 different countries. And, he is also the author of Ideas and Answers. So welcome, Joe. How's it going? Gretchen Winter, love your necklace, Gretchen. She's the clinical assistant professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And she had a responsibility of business and society after a career of practicing law and leading the global practice of at Baxter, a Fortune 100 medical products company. And finally, Patrick Nazo, principal of Better Business Practices. He's had over 30 years as a chief ethics and compliance officer across a bunch of tech companies, CA Technologies, and United Technologies Corp. So we have a great panel for you today. Of course, you know me. How's it going? I'm Nick Gallo, Chief Servant of Ethico. So we can drop these slides. Let's jump right into our presentation today, drop right into our conversation. So what we're going to be talking about today is how to climb the ladder. We have a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge on this panel. And I want to start first with Nancy. Nancy, let's talk a little bit about your first job in ethics and compliance and what got you noticed. So how did you get into that first job, and what do you think was kind of some of the some of the major things that helped get you noticed and climb that ladder in your career?
Well, I think the most important thing to learn from the introduction of each of us is that we've all been doing this a really long time. We're all very old. And when as the first ethics and compliance officer for the Boeing company, there weren't any programs. There wasn't any ethics and compliance officer or anything like that. And which sort of leads to my first bit of advice for people is, it's hard to move up if you're working in a corporation. It's a hierarchy. It's sort of like musical chairs. If there's no position, you can't move up. But you can recognize a need that hasn't been met, that hasn't been thought of. And so if you want to move up, create a job for yourself. And that's how I got into ethics and compliance in the first place. I was also interested in going into the business side of the house, but not quite sure that I wanted to do it or that I'd be able to do it. So being in the law department and then creating this new job and getting support for that, I had one foot in the law department and one foot in ethics and compliance that gave me more access to management. So I knew that I could always go back to practicing law. And if I saw the right opportunity to move into the business, I could bounce from there.
How about you, Nancy? What was the reason you took your first job in ethics and compliance, and what did you do to help advance your career in that space?
I think he means Gretchen.
Gretchen, I'm sorry.
Because we just heard from Nancy, but that's okay.
Same answer.
Yeah, similar answer, except I'd say that you can, in fact, position yourself so that you are recognized and ready for that position. Nancy's right. A position has to be open. On the other hand, folks have to be seeing you as someone who can fill that role. How do you do that? Often you can volunteer to do things to help advance the particular part of the company you are interested in. So in my case, we were building out ethics and compliance training, and I volunteered to be in the video. I volunteered to be a trainer in the Train the Trainer program when we were first writing our very first code of conduct, and we needed to roll this out through a company of 40,000 people. So positioning yourself to be seen, to be effective, and to be part of the effort to really bring this program or enhance the program for the company, I think is a great way to get yourself in position for these roles. I also want to note that Baxter was the kind of company where you were encouraged to take on different roles and responsibilities. Fundamentally, however, everybody who works in the company and wants to get ahead and does get ahead understands the business, likes the business. If you're working in a company and you're not that interested, I don't know, Nancy worked at Boeing, if you don't care about airplanes, if you work at a place like Baxter, which is about healthcare, and that's not your thing, it's going to be really hard to care a lot about the strategy of the company and the accomplishments of the company. So get to know the business and be in the business that excites you.
And what was it about the ethics and compliance role that attracted you to it, that caused you to raise your hand? Because I mean, we're going to see some kind of similar threads between everybody's story, where there's a willingness to sort of step out on the ledge, so to speak, or step into this other area. But what kind of what was the magnet that drew you into that area?
You know, I'm a lawyer by background and training, as is Nancy. Pat, you know, we are. A lot of us are lawyers. I care about companies. I care about people within companies, understanding what their obligations are, and then meeting those obligations. So my passion is to help a company and the people within it to accomplish their business objectives while adhering to the company standards, to the legal standards, to the employee handbook, to the code of conduct. Understand what the rules are, do your job in accordance with those standards, and The ethics and compliance function provides guidance to those who want to accomplish their jobs in a manner that's consistent with the company's objectives and standards.
That's great. Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about your path into ethics and compliance, what sort of attracted you to it, and how you were able to elevate your career? Because you've done a lot of really exciting, innovative things, throughout your career.
Well, thanks, Nick. And my story goes way back before there was something called compliance and ethics. And I worked in-house for 20 years, and I started doing antitrust work. And at that time, there was a lot of antitrust litigation, but I also very quickly got into antitrust compliance. I found that interesting, and I worked with certain groups whose focus was that element, the antitrust compliance. And then for various reasons, I got involved in environmental compliance. And then while I was in-house, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was passed, and I started doing work in there. And what I noticed was there was a similarity in all these different areas. And I started realizing that compliance and ethics was something separate from just practicing law. So it wasn't simply that I sat outside and looked and said, oh, compliance and ethics, that looks cool, I'm going to go into that. It didn't exist until we started doing this type of work. And you may know, with my college mentor, I co-authored the first book on the general field of compliance and ethics, where we talked about what we discovered there. So my route going forward was not the more traditional, okay, I'm in the company and I'm going to move up this way or that. In fact, I used to joke that life had been very nice, giving me a multi-billion-dollar laboratory to experiment with these things. But my approach was more external, and it was more writing, because I started writing about this as soon as I got into it, speaking, and ultimately that made it possible for me to team up with another person, go outside, start a consulting and law practice, and then ultimately we formed a company. So it's a little bit more of an unusual path. I liked the company that I worked in. I was interested in it, but I was more interested in this field of compliance and ethics. And I will add that I identified with the people I saw in the company who had this focus of doing the right thing and preventing misconduct. And so within the company, they became my clients, and they were the people that I championed. And so to this day, I have that same approach. I really champion the people who are on the front lines dealing with this on a day-to-day basis.
And what do you think you did to get yourself noticed in the field? Was it the book? Was it the approach? What was it? Was it focusing on the outcome? What was that sort of magic formula?
Okay, the answer to all those questions is yes. But for me particularly, it was writing, and then the speaking followed naturally from that. And so it was really writing and speaking. So when I ultimately left the company and went to work with Kirk Jordan, the people in the field knew me. And this was back before the internet. So I had an article published in the Corporate Counsel Association publication, in one of the local bar association journals, that type of thing. And so I got asked to participate in conferences. And so people knew me, and I could work from that network. So even when I was in-house, people would be contacting me who were starting up compliance programs on how they should do it, and really comparing notes. And in fact, in our industry, a couple of us worked together to start an industry practices forum modeled after the previous one in the defense industry. Again, it was tremendous networking. And the reason I was able to go out and work in a consulting firm was because I was able to establish these connections.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we're saying. Your network is your net worth. You have to build that network, and you have to kind of get out there, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And thank goodness that we're in an industry where that's like relatively more easy than it is in other places. Patrick, I'd like to pass it over to you to give us a little bit of an overview of your story, how you got into the ethics and compliance game, and what do you think the key to your success was in advancement in getting noticed and sort of moving up the ladder, or the jungle gym, as Wendy said, which I'll circle back to in a sec.
I guess my situation was I was either in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time. Because I was an associate general counsel for United Technologies, but responsible for government contracts, which had a huge component of compliance with respect to doing government contract business. And in that era, when I was doing that, the era of fraud, waste, and abuse came about in the 1980s, in the late 1980s. And defense contractors were being pummeled by the newspaper and by the Defense Department for egregious overcharging. And so because of that, CEOs got together. Jack Welch was one of them, who got a bunch of CEOs together to develop a program that would convince both the government and industry and people, community, that we were serious about doing things right. And because I was the government contracts person for UTC, I was anointed the compliance person for UTC to be part of what they called then the Defense Industry Initiatives. So my entrance into compliance was mainly because I was doing it, but because of circumstances around the country where the defense contractors were being accused of overcharging and overpricing. We had to do something to convince our customer that we were serious about doing things right. And so we developed compliance programs, and people like Nancy Higgins and Carol Marshall from Lockheed Martin and myself, a group of others, in effect, were part of this defense industry initiative. And we shared experiences. We told each other what we were doing because we were taking steps into quicksand every day without realizing where the next thing was going to happen or the next thing that we were going to be doing. We were trying to help each other navigate through that system.
So you know how I'm always talking about we are standing on the shoulders of giants, and the impact we're going to have over the next decade is because of all the groundwork and all the foundational work that has been done. These are the giants I'm talking about. I mean, you guys were really the pioneers of our industry in many ways. And you know, how do you see the impact of the things that you were working on when you were kind of pushing that frontier forward? How do you see how those things have sort of grown today? Like, how do you see, where we're headed relative to where you thought it would head? And why don't I start with you, Gretchen?
So where are we going? Well, you're right. It's based on where we've been. One of the huge developments in this field, I think, has been the proliferation of education programs for people who want to be part of the field. There are education programs, certification programs. This kind of opportunity to learn from others has really, really grown in the past decades. Both Joe, Nancy, and Pat were involved in the very beginning of the networking, where ethics and compliance officers at companies got to meet with one another, learn from one another, lean on one another for experience, for advice, for counsel. That base of networking, friendship, and sharing across industries and across companies hasn't changed, but the opportunity to build those networks has exploded. And I think that that's certainly one of the things that will continue to grow, using a lot of the tools that you were identifying, Nick, which really give a global aspect to this that wasn't necessarily there when so many of us began. A lot of this began in U.S. companies, in U.S. organizations that did business globally. And over time now, what we've seen is that the U.S. commitment to building effective ethics and compliance programs is duplicated, copied, imitated in countries around the world. So the global standards that we have begun to develop have in fact become, in many ways, global standards. And there's some countries that have even stepped beyond what the U.S. expects when it comes to effective ethics and compliance programs. So we have truly now a global profession, and I think that that's only going to continue to grow.
Joe, what would you add to that?
Well, I wanted to build, and I agree with Gretchen about the global nature of this, but I wanted to build on something that Pat talked about, because he talked about the Defense Industry Initiative. And I think that could get a lot more attention. People don't know the DII was the first best practices forum. Much of what's in the sentencing guidelines was built off of the DII. And the idea of industry practice, which you see in the sentencing guidelines, and the legacy of DII is one of the reasons why we have this free exchange. It was built into the field right from the first day. So it is normal for all of us to exchange ideas, to go to conferences, to have industry practice sessions, to do what we're doing now, where we really tell the stories and are very open about what happened. So in our field, I think more than many others,
100%.
We all support each other. And
that's so true. And
I
I remember when I left Boeing to go to Lockheed Martin because I wanted to be in the Washington, D.C. area. And I went in to talk to Phil Condit, the CEO, who's my boss, to say I was leaving. And, I told him that the great thing about the ethics and compliance field is there was nothing I could tell Lockheed Martin, who was the biggest competitor to Boeing at the time, nothing I could tell them as a Lockheed Martin employee that I wouldn't tell them as a Boeing employee about the ethics and compliance field. And we all shared everything because we wanted to raise the bar on ethics in corporate America and initially in the defense industry, but way beyond. I remember the first time I met Joe was at it might have been a DII-sponsored event after the sentencing guidelines were put into place. And Joe was a speaker, and he told this story that I've always remembered, and I tell others and give credit to Joe, of course. He was an antitrust lawyer, and he was talking about antitrust compliance, and he said he would talk to his employees about if you go to a trade association meeting, how you make sure that you're not violating the antitrust laws. And if you're at a group at a table and people are talking about prices, you should knock over the water pitcher. And we all go, why would you do that? And he said, they'll never remember that, you also had to stand up and say, I cannot discuss pricing and leave the room. He said, nobody will ever remember that you left about pricing, but they'll all remember the water pitcher, and then they know that you left for that basis. Great story.
Yeah, that's that classic Joe Murphy pattern interrupt. We got a great question in the chat, and I want to use this. We always want this to be super tactical for folks. And here's a question. I have an MPH focused on health administration and policy. One of the issues I have is when I apply for positions, HR seems to see me as not meeting the educational/degree requirements. I've been presenting regularly for HCCA. What recommendations do you have? So what would you tell somebody who seems to be hitting a wall due to not having these educational requirements when in practice and in actuality they seem to be able to do that kind of a job? Why don't we start with you, Pat?
Well, I'm number one, I'm not sure why they're basing these educational requirements on somebody who wants to be in the ethics and compliance arena, because what you really want to address is the fact that you understand certain aspects of business. The whole idea of what we do is helping each segment of business do their job in a better way and in a more complete way with respect to both ethics and compliance. So knowing something about IT, knowing something about procurement, knowing something about HR, knowing something about the legal department, all of those things are the kinds of experiences that should really enhance your ability to be an ethics and compliance person. The education, number one, the majority of the education you can get is very short-lived. I mean, it's right. 2 weeks of courses. There's not a lot of education out there that, and unless you're going to get a degree from Bentley in ethics and compliance, there are very few schools that give you any of that kind of educational experience. So I think the argument back to anyone that talks about educational experience or certification is understanding that they've been in business, they understand business, they've been working in business, and have a desire to help enhance business.
I think that's great advice. What would you add to that, Nancy?
Well, I think the questioner is probably talking about how you get them to even let you in the door. If you don't meet the minimum requirements, your resume gets kicked out. And so probably what you need to do is try to make contact with somebody in the company and ask for an opportunity for an informational interview, something to get you in where you're not going to ask that person for a job, but you want to talk to them about the company. You're really going to need a contact. It's hiring is one of the most miserable things that a manager goes through. I will tell you, having done it many times. And there's always a lot more people applying who are qualified, that you can easily ignore the others. But if you hear from somebody in the company that this is a person that you might want to meet, you'll do it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Kind of doing that internal networking in a more informal way can help kind of build some relationships where you might actually get pulled into that. And I think Pat's advice was phenomenal. We have to reframe this sort of criteria to the extent we can from that HR person's perspective, because there's so much tacit knowledge that comes from learning the business, being in the business, and seeing how this circulatory system that is the ethics and compliance function can actually affect the business and help that, help these different departments pursue the organizational mission in a better, cleaner way. Anything to add to that, Gretchen?
Well, I think it's a little bit sad, frankly, that there are HR organizations that have a strict interpretation of who can be in an ethics and compliance role. I've heard it from a lot of headhunters in the last decade. Well, I don't know, that person doesn't have this certification, therefore they can't be. We're looking for someone who's a JD. We're looking for someone who's a former prosecutor. The requirements for some reason have become narrower and narrower. And I agree with both Pat and Nancy and their advice. I guess the other thing I would say to this particular person, you've got an MPH, you're focused on health administration and policy. I don't know where you're applying for positions, but that background would certainly be appreciated in a lot of healthcare companies, hospital systems, and so on. You're speaking at HCCA, and I would hope you're networking the heck out of those opportunities to let the folks who are in this field know about your interest, your availability, and your passion. A good ethics and compliance program in an organization isn't just lawyers or former prosecutors or people who have an ethics and compliance education. Those folks are part of an effective program. Folks who understand the core business and where that business is going also have a role to play, in my view. And if you want a well-rounded compliance function, then building out opportunities for people who have perhaps different backgrounds is necessary. So the kinds of things that Nancy and suggested in particular, I think could be helpful, and really leaning into the networking that you can do at HCCA where you are already speaking could help as well.
And, to that point, I think there is a sort of a new chapter that we're entering where more and more ethics and compliance programs are recognizing the need for diversity of background, because there's so many different facets to an effective program. You need marketing, you need data analytics, you need messaging, you need, that sort of legal mind. It's not just, a myopic view of a single archetype. You need that sort of diverse background. And I think the programs that are embracing that, I'm just saying that there's like precedent for it now, right? Like the programs that are embracing the synergy that can come from a diverse group of people in executing a program to drive the influence that's necessary to crowdsource risk intelligence at scale is becoming more and more common. One thing that I would add is there is this concept that my good friend, Chris Voss introduced me to, which is called an objection audit. And what this objection audit does is it basically, if you've ever seen the movie 8 Mile, Eminem wins the rap battle by doing basically an objection audit. So pulling forward and pulling out the likely objections that this HR person is going to have and incorporating them in the front end of your talk track can do a lot to eliminate these objections and address them head on. So, sometimes, an example could be, sometimes I talk to HR folks who think that I don't have the right background for this. But after I talk to them, they begin to understand that my background, because I did A, B, C, and D, really allows me to bring some added depth and some added dimension to this role in the most important ways. And by the way, there's a big, there's precedent for, more diversity in these programs. Obviously, don't stumble through it like I did. You're going to want to practice that in the mirror first. But my point is, you can address those objections on the front end and couple that with the networking that we're talking about informally within your own organization or at these events. Those can be some tailwinds for your ascension into the position that you're looking for. On the tail of that, I want to share this next question, and I think this is I think you guys are going to have some great advice for this, but many associations and conferences are very cliquey, and they use the same speakers all the time, even if they're no good. How do you break into that speaking circuit? Having done the article writing and RFP submissions, even connecting with people that are in the in-groups at those conferences to do a joint presentation hasn't been effective, or folks don't want to let you into the in-group because it impacts their ability to get the speaking gigs. Any additional strategies to get published beyond self-produced blog or land speaking opportunities in person, such as webinars, podcasts, et cetera? How would you advise this person who feels like they're kind of hitting a wall and they have a lot to add? They have, they have a lot of great ideas, but they're kind of hitting this wall and getting into the in-group, so to speak, and having more opportunities to speak and share those across our industry.
Okay, so could I?
Wow.
Yes.
I'll throw out a couple of thoughts, and I wanted to mention one comment on the prior point. I do think, and I didn't read the person's background, I do think that having one of the certifications is important. And while I agree it's good to have business background, there is a pretty fair amount of knowledge available relating just to doing compliance and ethics. And people should never understate that. So it really is an area that people should study. So I do advocate for the certification approach. As far as, and rather than focusing on the individual who asked this question, because I don't know the person, but there's two different elements to this. One is you may be missing something in your own assessment of yourself. If you see comparable people being accepted and you're being rejected, it might be a fault with the system. There might be something that you could do to improve how you're coming off. But I throw in another point, which is, it's kind of like you're looking at this as a fixed opportunity. There's X, Y, and Z areas, and I want to do a presentation there. And you're omitting the possibility that you yourself might develop something. And so, for example, if you're trying to get published on things that are on LinkedIn and nobody's accepting you, LinkedIn is an open market. And so you might look at what you could do. Now, as my colleagues would know, it's a little different for me because when I started out, there weren't that many alternatives. So to work with somebody starting something new might have been a little easier, but I'll just throw that out as a possibility. And of course, I think the point that Nancy introduced about the personal networking, that is really key. But I sense from the specific person that there's a certain element of kind of anger and frustration. And so you might want to do a little personal screening first on whether there's something you're giving off that's causing this problem. I can guarantee you there is not a conspiracy there. I used to be on the selection committee for SCCE. I knew the kinds of things I was looking for. I was looking for really good topics. It was nice if I could depend on the person who was doing the speaking. I was looking for people who had in-house experience, not just outside. We were also looking for diversity of viewpoints and perspectives. And my experience was it was a pretty objective pattern. I also used to do the Practicing Law Institute program. And of course, Rebecca Walker works on that. If you want to deal with somebody who does not have a bias and is open-minded, Rebecca Walker is tremendous. So I push back a lot on that. Oh, it's these bad guys who are only sticking with their clique. It's not the case. It has not been my experience. All people tend to go with what's more familiar. That's kind of normal. But there isn't a barrier to breaking in. And if you want to do it, there are a lot of different ways to do it.
And one of the ways you can do it is to start thinking regionally rather than nationally. The opportunity to speak at a regional conference in the Northeast, or to actually promote a conference in the Northeast or in the Midwest or in the South or in the West on a particular subject, and get some people together in corporations in that area to in effect have that kind of a regional conference gives you the opportunity to shine in a particular area and gives you kind of that visibility that you can extend then to something more national. But think very, very seriously about breaking into a regional kind of situation.
That's phenomenal advice. Nancy, anything to add to this one?
I'm really useless on this. I've never done anything but answer the phone.
Okay, well, just pick up the phone then, I guess, with Nancy's advice. How about you, Gretchen?
I just want to reinforce this notion of regional activities. Houston, Atlanta, Seattle, Chicago all have these regional business ethics networks that are not only great opportunities for networking, but also wonderful opportunities to stand up and say, I have something to say, and to get then the kind of experience and exposure that could help with your applications to some of the national conferences. Like Joe, I've attended a lot of these conferences over the years. And yes, there are some speakers that tend to repeat. And sometimes that's because they are actually really good and have good and interesting messages. There are also, though, tremendous numbers of new and different people who are in attendance. And I always learn something every time I attend a conference, not because I'm going to the same speakers, but because the conferences tend to bring in a lot of new and different people that speak to some of the trends and some of the new developments in this space. So keep trying and focus on the regional, use your networking ability.
And yeah, that's great advice. What I would add to that is, don't give up. It can be very frustrating when you know that you have a phenomenal message to share and you feel like you're hitting that wall and you just can't pick that lock. What I've had some success with is just like sending a ton of proposals. So Joe, you're lucky you're not on the committee anymore, because you'd be reading about a dozen that I send, but send a bunch of ideas. And I think keep sending them. Another tip would be to go on ChatGPT and make sure that title is really catchy. Hey ChatGPT, turn my idea for a webinar, turn this title into a catchy TikTok style hook. Those hooks are critical, and those are becoming more and more important for us to get that attention for that committee to really dive into those learning objectives. But really keep trying, and yeah, I think that's phenomenal advice. I got another one here. See, I love this. This is like free career coaching, okay? Free ethics and compliance, how to climb the ladder coaching from some absolute giants. If there is currently no upward movement in your company or organization, what are your options and what should you consider? That's a great question. Thanks for sharing that. Why don't we start with you, Nancy? I'm sure you have something to say about that one.
Well, I've done this at 4 different companies after 10 years practicing law, and the way I moved again has just been answering the phone. But I'll tell you, there are 3 pieces of career advice that I live by and have given to others. The first comes from my husband, who says, the time to look for a job is when you've got a good one. My favorite one comes from the wife of one of my law partners, who said, change your attitude or change your job. And, we spend a lot of time complaining about our jobs. But a client said, mid-career course corrections are a very good thing. And I'll tell you that, if you're doing the same general field at one company like ethics and compliance, if you move to another company, you've got your skill base, but it's an entirely new world with new problems and new people, and it's really energizing. So if you feel that you're stuck in your company and you've reached out to managers in different parts of the company, you should also be looking outside, thinking about what would be a good move for you.
What would you add there, Pat?
One of the things that I guess I've always gotten frustrated with is the concept that there is no upward mobility. It happens all the time. Whether you don't think it's existing, it happens all the time. Go look at Forbes magazine when it reports on a yearly basis how many CEOs get fired over a period of a year. You're talking thousands of CEOs lose their jobs and new CEOs come up, what you need to do is make yourself visible. You need to spend time at the IT department on and understanding their compliance program. You need to make yourself visible at the HR department to understand how their HR organization's compliance program is working. You need to get out of your office and you need to be in other people's offices, understanding what they're doing and what their problems are. You become visible. And when mobility does occur, and let me tell you, it will occur, it occurs all the time, you will be there and you'll be recognized because you'll be somebody that people remember seeing, being involved, wanting to help, wanting to assist. And if it's that much of a roadblock, you need to move on. You may need to look at another company because mobility does exist. I mean, all of us have found ourselves in situations where we've either found better jobs or we've been pushed into better jobs over our careers because mobility does exist. Don't get yourself frustrated. You need to push yourself out of the office and into other people's functions.
Can I just add one thing that Pat reminds me of? That is, I guess when I went to one company, I thought I had a lot of imagination, but I didn't, because the people in charge then were sort of in my mind, the people who would always be in charge. No. Focus on the people who report to the people who are in charge. Build your relationships with the next level because, as Pat says, there's going to be change and they're going to be up there. They may turn out to be your boss one day. So build those relationships internally. Try to help people. And if you can't help them, connect them with someone who can.
That's great. I mean, that's such great advice. Life is relationships, building those relationships. Again, I mean, I say this every single week, expanding that network, whether it's on LinkedIn or it's expanding that network within your organization can only lead to better things. We have to, as Pat said, get out of our office and start making more of those connections and add more nodes to our network, because it's really like a parabolic increase in your impact and, those who know you. Joe, what would you add to this? Because I think I really love this question. I think a lot of people struggle with it.
Well, I'm going to throw out another option, which is thinking outside of the company and thinking about whether you're the kind of person who could start your own business based on what you know in this area. Now, I know in my case, when I went outside, it was pretty much a surprise to people. I'm an introvert. I'm not the kind of person you would have thought would do that. But there are ways to do it. To your point, Nick, about the networking, it's not just networking in-house, it's networking outside. And that's one way you may find opportunities outside, including the opportunity to start your own business. Now, that's a topic for an entirely separate discussion. Christy Grant Hart and Kirsten Liston and I actually did a book on this called The Compliance Entrepreneur's Handbook. And it really does go from, gee, you're in-house, what do you want to do? Can you actually do this? I would just say be open-minded about it and consider this as one of your options.
And I just want to jump in and talk about the career spiral. This is about ladders, and someone had noted earlier, is it really a ladder? No, not necessarily. My own career is really one that is much more represented by the concept of a spiral. Why? Because opportunities came up that weren't in the ladder, but were in fact adjacent to what I was already doing. I'm a lawyer. I'm a labor and employment lawyer. I went to Baxter to fill a role in employee relations, so in the labor and employment law field, but really closely connected with HR. A job opened in HR in a division as opposed to in corporate. And I had great advice from a mentor who said, you got to learn the business both across, so you got to understand all the corporate stuff at the high level, and you got to go deep. You got to understand what happens in division on the ground and in a variety of divisions. So I took this HR job and I moved into training and development, and I took this role called re-engineering. It was a hot thing at the time. Had the opportunity to learn so much more about so many of the different functions in so many of our different organizations. We had 40,000 employees. They weren't all doing the same thing. And it was a great opportunity to dig deep into a lot of different parts of the company. Through that process, you meet a variety of people and you get another opportunity. Do you get salary increases along the way? You do, but it's not a ladder. So don't think of it that way. Look for opportunities that are adjacent to what you might be doing, that are going to give you another set of skills that will enable you to then take on the next job. When I was asked to be the vice president of business practices and run our global ethics and compliance program, they told me I was a good candidate. Why? Because I had all of these different experiences and relationships across and around the company. And I could walk into this role and be able to talk to people in our different divisions, in the different job categories, and have a basic understanding of the kind of work that went on. So I say think about spirals as opposed to ladders, and open yourself to other opportunities within the company that you might not be seeing.
I would never advise anyone to make all of their moves being lateral moves, but don't hesitate to make a lateral move once or twice in your career if it's going to give you the opportunity to get promoted somewhere else in another function. So every now and then, a good lateral move can position you in a way that will give you the kind of promotion and the upward mobility that you want. So lateral moves are not to be frowned on all the time.
100% right. And, you know, a lot of what Gretchen just said really resonated with me. And it kind of goes back to what Wendy said earlier in the comments of, you know, we tend to think about these things like a ladder, and every single step needs to be higher and higher, and my title needs to go up, and my pay needs to go up, and so forth. Like if you go on Google or Yahoo Finance or something and you look, you know, type in Amazon and zoom out for, you know, a 10-year period, you see that, you know, the stock price kind of goes up like that. But if you zoom in on, you know, a weekly view or a daily view, it's a bunch of ups and downs, and that's really how everything grows. It's a bunch of these like J curves, and if we can embrace those J curves and start to build momentum, we can now open ourselves up to a lot more opportunities, I think, and consider a lot more opportunities, as Pat and Gretchen both said. And the other thing I would say is that you got to have a plan. You know, if you've ever tried to like fire a rifle, you can never hit the target unless you're lining up, you know, the sights that are near you and the sights that are, you know, at the end of the barrel. And so if you don't have that plan, if you don't have those sights at the end of the barrel, it's easy to kind of get lost in the morass of like trying to climb this corporate ladder. But if you have that future view of like, this is what I want to be in 5 years, this is what I want to be in 10 years, you now can start to open your mind up to, as Pat said, a lateral move, or a move that, like Gretchen said, that can give you some of that broader experience that's going to help you accelerate to that next role. If you're not planning and you're not putting that sort of rudder in the ship of your life, you're just going to kind of drift by those currents. But we can fight against those by having that kind of plan. And look, that plan, of course, can change over time as new opportunities come up or as your life situation changes. But having sort of that summit that you're climbing toward gives you a little bit more, you know, like I said, budget, both for lateral moves, but also for current experiences. And you can reference, is this really building me towards that future goal? I want to touch on this question. How much more time do we have? This should have been 2 hours, you guys. My goodness. Okay. I want to talk about what advice can we give introverts? Because I think on average, our industry oversamples with introverts. And I think a lot of introverts have it, you know, especially when that's coupled with high conscientiousness, which I think is part of these sort of ethics and compliance archetypes. It's sometimes difficult for folks to, as Pat said, get out of the office and make those, you know, build those relationships, as Gretchen said. Joe, you said that you're an introvert, and yet you've been able to build this, you know, robust network. So give us some advice and some tactics for introverts, whether that's at a conference or whether that's sitting behind our screen and taking advantage of the networking opportunity that LinkedIn is.
Sure. Well, I'm going to start with a reference, and that's a book called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. And it's a reminder that being an introvert is a strength. It's not a diagnosis. And I've also been advised that an introvert can do anything an extrovert can do. An extrovert can do anything an introvert can do. The difference is an extrovert draws strength from being around people. An introvert draws strength from being alone. But one of the aspects, I think, of being an introvert, particularly, is the focus on being able to study, quietly learn something. And so one of the things that I learned it early on, but I always wished I had learned it earlier, was I studied public speaking. And so I learned there were specific things that you could apply that would enable you to do this. I also like reading, research, and I found that I could use that for networking. Now, when I was networking, for example, I came across an article by a brilliant professor in Australia. Back then, networking meant you got out a piece of paper, you wrote your letter, you put it in the mail, and you heard back, in a matter of weeks if you were writing to somebody in Australia. But nevertheless, that ability to use your strengths and to study the things that you think might be the exclusive domain of extroverts, where you can learn how to do this. I'm a big believer in active listening. This is something you can also study and helps you establish relationships with people. You may also know I'm a ballroom dancer. You wouldn't expect this of an introvert, but if there's an opportunity to dance, I want to be the first one out on the floor. Why? Because ballroom dancing, it's social, but it's one-on-one. And an introvert can be very good on that one-on-one communications. Do not invite me to a cocktail party. I do not ever want to go. I do
Unless
not do
there's a dance floor, right?
But
Unless there's a dance floor, yeah.
Anytime I'm dancing, I'm one-on-one with one person. And it's a skill that I can learn. And so for somebody who's an introvert, like if you're thinking of starting out on a business, which I did it with a partner who I felt comfortable with. He was also a quiet person. This was Kirk Jordan, but very effective with people. Whereas for me, what I brought to the party was I was very well known in the field. And I was known through my writing and through my speaking. And so I learned techniques. One technique I learned as a speaker, I had to give a talk on the self-evaluative privilege to a group of lawyers, very technical. I built it around the story of John Wolfe, the prosecutor, and the three little pigs who built their compliance programs out of different things. I'll leave it to your imagination how that story ended. But I do know it had a long-term impact on the audience, and it was the highest rating I ever got for giving a presentation. But it was from applying the introvert skills of learning and studying and reading about this technique and applying it.
Any other introverts on? Pat, are you an introvert?
Nancy and Gretchen and Joe will tell you they think I'm not, but I am. And at a cocktail party, I would prefer not to be there. But I learned a long time ago that to be successful, you need to listen, and then you need to speak up. And you need to find the right voice at the right time, with the right subject, with the right facts. If you do that as an introvert, you will be noticed and you will succeed. So you've got to overcome it, but you overcome it with the facts, with the knowledge, with the capability, and with the trust in yourself that you've got the right answer when you speak.
Right. That's great advice. Gretchen, what would you add?
I'd say that introverts can help themselves within the organization by scheduling regular update meetings with whatever leaders need to hear your message. So who are those people that you've got information about? Who are the people you need to be in touch with? And if you schedule regular meetings, if it's once a month, once a week, once a quarter, even once a year, you get them calendared, then you can plan for them. Then you can be prepared to go in with the right facts, as Pat said, with the strong message about the effectiveness of your ethics and compliance program within the confines of their organization. You will demonstrate that you're adding value, and you will be seen on a regular basis, and you will be able to do that in many ways on your own terms in a one-on-one or small group conversation. I think that can help too.
That's great advice.
Are you an introvert, Gretchen?
I am not. I am a total extrovert. I love cocktail parties.
I'm an introvert. And when you see me at a event, cocktail party, networking time, I'll be there for like 4 minutes and then I'll leave. I can't take it. But most people think I'm very outgoing. So, we can, just like Susan Cain, who I sat next to once at a lunch, Joe, and it was fascinating and delighted to learn about introverts. You can pretend to be extroverted when you need to, but then you have to go away and kind of regroup.
The difference
You're
between
also right about scheduling the meetings, and I want to share an anecdote Bobby Kipp told once that I've also shared in the future. And she, as an ethics officer, would go around to meet with management trying to build support for the program. And she had a meeting with one woman who was running an organization, and at the end of it, she said, "So, what's my action?" And Bobby said, "Well, nothing. I just want you to support the program." She said, "If you leave here without giving me an action item, I will have had a delightful, interesting break in my day. If you actually want to make progress, you have to ask me what to do something, and I will do it." And so when you set up these meetings, think what your goal is from the meeting. It may just to be checking in, so you have this person have an opportunity to tell you what's going on in the organization that you may need to know about, but always go in with an ask.
What I would add is, particularly take advantage of the fact that, there are more than 50%, if half of the population are extroverts and half of the population globally are introverts, there is more than 50% of our colleagues in the ethics and compliance field who are introverts. So lean into that, get a little introvert sticker at your next conference, and you're going to see other introverts' eyes light up and they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm an introvert too." We have to figure out a way to get out of our shell and build into building that network a little bit more, because everybody here has talked about time and time again, learn the business, get out there, build relationships. Those are kind of the foundational pillars in really, climbing this corporate ladder or spiral, ascending through this career spiral, or climbing the career jungle gym, as Wendy said. So I know we're a little bit over time. I appreciate everyone for joining us. Round of applause for this panel. Connect with these guys on LinkedIn. Absolutely. Join us next week for Compliance Hot Topics with me and Matt Kelly. Hopefully Matt will have eyeliner on as well. And we will see you guys next week. Take care.